Well, we're going to turn now to the latest on the crisis in Crimea, where tensions are high as residents vote today on breaking away from Ukraine and becoming part of Russia. The explosive referendum has been internationally condemned as illegal, and ABC's Alex Marquardt is covering the vote from Ukraine. Alex.
Good morning, Bianna. It has been a gray and wet morning here in Crimea, but that hasn't stopped large numbers of Crimean voters turning out to vote in this historic election to decide whether to secede from Ukraine and join Russia. A steady stream of voters heading into those polling stations. We won't know the preliminary results until later tonight, but they are all but a foregone conclusion. We assume that Crimean voters will vote overwhelmingly to join Russia. We spoke with a young voter this morning who excitedly told me that it's like going home, that he is ethnically Russian and wants to live in Russia. The minority of Crimeans who are against this are boycotting, staying at home, saying, like the U.S., that this is an illegitimate vote. But already concern is shifting to eastern Ukraine, where there are fears of a large-scale Russian invasion. Pro and anti-Russian demonstrations there turning deadly. There are around 9,000 Russian troops that have massed along the border with Ukraine, and Moscow is now warning that it is considering calls to intervene. Dan, Bianna?
Tensions are really escalating. Thank you. And let's bring in the host of ABC's This Week, George Stephanopoulos, for this. George, just a few hours ago, I got off the phone with the acting foreign minister of Ukraine and asked him on a scale of 1 to 10, what did he think as far as war with Russia? He said their chances are very high. That is not reassuring to hear.
Not at all. He sees those troops on the border. He sees the seizure by the Russians of that natural gas plant this morning and says that is the big fear right now, that the Russians are not satisfied with this referendum in Crimea, which would give Crimea independence, move them much more towards Moscow, that they will move further into eastern Ukraine. That could set off a civil war, that could split the country. And there's precious little right now, it appears, that the rest of the world can do about it.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that. What kind of leverage does the White House have? We're hearing talk of sanctions, but what are sanctions actually, and is there any history of sanctions actually working?
Well, these are actually going to be the most extensive sanctions against Russia since the Cold War. They're going to be putting a freeze on assets and visas for high-level Russians, including those in and outside of the government. But I think you're exactly right. When you've got a country like Russia that is so large and they've got so many other ways to get the resources they need, it's unlikely that sanctions alone could do this job. But the hope is that if the West unites around this idea, Russia can at least be deterred from moving further into eastern Ukraine.
And here domestically, at least, the president does seem to have support from both Republicans and Democrats to act in some way. The foreign minister and the prime minister, the acting prime minister of Ukraine, were here meeting with the president last week, and they said they met with both parties and got reassuring news from them.
Bipartisan support in Congress for aid to Ukraine, even though it's gotten bogged down in some internal domestic politics in the Senate. I think one of the questions going forward is, if Russia moves, will the United States move then to give military aid to Ukraine? That's a tougher question.
Well, it was disturbing to talk to the foreign minister when I asked if he had spoken with his counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, in Russia. He said he can't get through to him. It's not something you want to hear.
Is. Okay, Bianna, thanks.
George, thank you.
George.
And George will have much more on all this matter later on ABC's This Week.